Hey, it's Jen. Welcome to my channel where apparently I walk my dog and talk about stuff. So if that sounds fun to you, you're in the right place.
This month I'm sharing with you stories and people and characters that have stuck with me and that I think about often. If you missed my first video on this topic, you can find it in the link below. Today I wanted to share with you a fresh air interview with Tony Hale. I will also link to this interview below in the description so you can listen to it. It's a podcast.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. My guest Tony Hale has won 2 Emmy Awards for his performance on HBO's comedy series Veep. He plays Gary Walsh, the personal aide to Selina Meyer, the vice president who last season inherited the White House after the president resigned. Hale also co-starred in Arrested Development as Buster, the youngest of the Bluth siblings.
In this interview with Terry Gross, Hale talks about the anxiety of being in between jobs and the awkwardness that takes over when people ask you what you're up to or what's next for you. And, oh man, did I feel this deeply last year when I was looking for work. I mean, most dummies find a new job before they leave their old job, but not this dummy. I had a significant time gap between jobs, and it was pretty brutal on my small talk game when out in public.
You've said in the past that you used to be worried at parties, that you'd be asked, so what do you do for a living? And if you didn't have a role booked, you wouldn't know what to say, and you wouldn't know how to present yourself. Can you talk a little bit about the anxieties that kind of thing
Yeah,
creates?
It's my favorite topic. I mean, there's a reason I do anxious characters. That comes from a lot of personal anxiety.
Does it?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, I remember being in New York and thinking like, oh, I want to have something in my back pocket to be able to talk about. And if like 3 or 4 months had gone by since doing the job, I'd been like, oh, that's too much time to bring that up in conversation. So you wanted to have something relevant. And I just remember doing that a lot, which is a bummer, because I think in this business you get the question of like, what's next for you? What's next for you? What's next for you? And it can get you so focused on that, oh God, I have to have something coming up, or I have to have something that you can, because you don't kind of go up to a dentist and say, what's next for you? Oh, well, I'm doing this molar, and I might do a cavity. It's like since we're freelancers, people are curious, which I think is great, but you kind of always maybe want to have something in your arsenal to say, oh, I don't think it's right, but in your head, actors can be like, oh, I want to have something coming up, or having just done something to have something to talk about, which is a really unfortunate way of thinking.
Clearly, it's not just actors that feel this way. I think every human wants to avoid looking or feeling like they're unwanted or not good enough.
Brian and I used to joke about that all the time, about how it's more palatable to tell people that you're freelancing rather than unemployed and looking for work. Being unemployed just carries an emotional burden that is kind of hard to manage sometimes. And then there's also a tricky social stigma to being unemployed and looking for work. I think you feel like people automatically assume that something's wrong with you, that you don't have a job. And it's probably more perception than it is true, but it's just easier to say you're freelancing.
Another thing Hale mentions in this interview is that he tends to play anxious characters, which comes from a lot of his own personal anxiety. And for me, as a writer and a creative, this falls under the write what you know mentality of leaning into your quirks and your perceived weaknesses. Just run with it. When we write and create from a place of vulnerability, that's where the best comedy comes from and where the best drama comes from, because it's real. It comes from a real place and it feels authentic.
One of my favorite books on this topic is called Writing from the Inside Out, and I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but I will link to it below in the description. I read this years ago, and it was very transformative for me in helping me find my voice as a writer. And so if you are a writer or a creative and can apply a lot of these things to any sort of creative work that you do, I highly recommend this book. I will link it below in the description.
And finally, he also talks in this interview about his struggle with contentment and how he wanted something for a very long time and he finally got it, and how terrifying it was that he felt like he still wasn't satisfied. So overall, it's a great interview, and there's lots of little nuggets in there that I think about frequently, and I wanted to share it with you, and I hope you take the time to listen to it. If you have a story about a time when you were in between something, I'd love to hear about it. Was it exciting? Was it scary? Debilitating? How did you talk about it to other people? How did you talk about it to yourself? I'd love to hear your stories. I personally feel like I'm always at the awkward in-between phase, or not good enough for something. Just leave a comment below. Also, if you haven't yet, please subscribe by hitting that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.